Welcome to Armpit Intellectuals. I'm Zara, and joining me today is my co-host Bilal. In today's episode, we explore the complex and controversial case of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, a Pakistani neuroscientist whose imprisonment has ignited global outrage.
This case touches on critical themes like justice, human rights, international law, and the treatment of prisoners, especially women and Muslims, within the U.S. criminal justice system.
We'll cover the circumstances of her arrest, allegations of abuse at FMC Carswell, where she is currently incarcerated, and the diplomatic tensions surrounding her incarceration, as well as the systemic flaws this case exposes.
So let's get back into her background a bit. Aafia Siddiqui was born in Karachi, Pakistan in 1972. She was a high achiever, earning scholarships to study in the United States. Siddiqui attended prestigious institutions, completing degrees in biology from MIT and later earning a PhD in neuroscience from Brandeis University.
Sister Aafia is going to be a sophomore at MIT, inshallah. She's doing her major is in genetics, and she'll be leaving day after tomorrow. Sister Aafia is going to be involved in MSA at MIT, and she's already the Dawah coordinator, and she's already started work. Alhamdulillah. Please, Sister Aafia.
Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. It is my challenge, not only to every single person on the face of this planet Earth, but also if there's any civilization on any other planet, it's my challenge to them as well, that Islam is the best savior and protector for women.
She lived in the US with her husband and children during the 1990s and early 2000s. However, her life took a sharp turn in 2003 when she mysteriously disappeared upon returning to Pakistan. And what happened next remains disputed to this day.
Pakistani authorities claim Siddiqui was abducted, likely by intelligence agencies, while the US government suggested she had ties to Al-Qaeda and voluntarily went underground. She resurfaced 5 years later, arrested by Afghan police in Ghazni, Afghanistan in 2008.
According to Al Jazeera, FBI agents and US military personnel arrived to interrogate her, and the official US narrative alleges she was caught with notes on bomb making and plans for attacks on American targets. They claimed she gained control of a rifle belonging to one of the army officers. In the struggle that ensued, the service member fired on Siddiqui, hitting her at least once in the torso. For the next few days, Siddiqui underwent surgery, after which she was transferred to a prison in the United States, where she has been ever since.
The FBI alert claimed that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks on the US, had implicated Siddiqui as someone who had provided administrative support for Al-Qaeda operations in the US. This was the first time the FBI had issued a notice linking a woman with Al-Qaeda's operations. Siddiqui has always denied these accusations, insisting the evidence was fabricated. It is said that she was married to Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ammar al-Baluchi, while living in their home in Karachi. However, it is also argued that the marriage, which was very short, was only so that the now mahram woman was not living in the house. Al-Baluchi divorced Aafia once he was taken into custody by the US and is now imprisoned in Guantanamo. Human rights activists have questioned the legitimacy of the trial, citing procedural flaws and political motivations.
So now we'll dive into the media narrative and the trial of Aafia Siddiqui and how it is portrayed as a case of bias. The media's portrayal of Siddiqui further complicated the case. She was branded with sensationalist titles like Lady Al-Qaeda and the Mata Hari of Al-Qaeda. Mata Hari was a Dutch courtesan who was also a spy during World War I. Such labels shaped public perception, making it difficult to separate facts from political propaganda. It's just one example of how mainstream media shapes the grand narrative, particularly the narrative that surrounds political fear-mongering and Islamophobia.
The trial itself was marred by inconsistencies. Crucially, there was no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no gun residue, linking Siddiqui to the weapon she allegedly used. Afghan officials who were key witnesses did not testify during the proceedings.
And additionally, the sentence, 86 years in prison, seems unjust and disproportionate. Legal experts argue that the verdict reflects post-9/11 anxieties and prejudices against Muslims, and the so-called war on terror and the concept of the axis of evil, both are concepts that are connected to Bush's presidency, gives rise to Islamophobic sentiment and violence in the West. Even though Obama vowed to end the war on terror and close Guantanamo, Bagram was referred to as Obama's Guantanamo, and, if not relevant, Abu Ghraib. The absence of injuries by Siddiqui on the U.S. officials should have mitigated the charges, but the political climate likely influenced the harsh outcome.
It's important to recognize Pakistan's effort to intervene. Well, there is something to recognize, I guess, here. Since her sentencing, the Pakistani government has lobbied for Siddiqui's release, citing her deteriorating health. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Yusuf Raza Gilani, also referred to Siddiqui as the daughter of the nation. Yet these efforts have met consistent resistance from the US because, as you know, Pakistan remains closely nestled to its neo-imperialist and neo-orientalist sovereign as it has since its inception. It's a very delicate word of just saying कि अब्बू कौन है?
The free match.
Yeah.
Who's your daddy?
Orientalist sovereign.
America.
America.
So now let's discuss the abuse allegations at FMC Carswell by Siddiqui, which, I feel are very important to discuss. I think it's quite a contentious and highlighted subject right now. And so, shifting the focus to Siddiqui's time in FMC Carswell, which is the federal women's prison in Fort Worth, Texas. Human rights advocates have reported severe abuses at the facility where Siddiqui has allegedly faced physical, sexual, and psychological harm. And it's really tough to say allegedly, but,
It's definitely happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's just allegedly, it's such a journalistic stance to take. I mean, or I guess diplomatic, but I mean,
Right.
it's definitely happened. Let's be
Yeah.
honest.
And Clive Stafford Smith, who I think if you see today, he's in a lot of TV shows as well.
He was on Al Jazeera and the
Yeah.
Pakistan experience, right?
Yeah. So one of her attorneys described Carswell as the worst prison he's encountered.
Maybe we could touch on the institution where Aafia is being held, FMC Carswell, so meaning it's a federal medical center, but it's really a prison. Tell us what it's like inside this place.
I was genuinely horrified when I went there. I've been to most of the maximum security prisons in America. I've been to Guantanamo 42 times. I thought I'd seen it all. But I went to FMC Carswell, and
It's worse than Guantanamo.
oh, it's way worse than Guantanamo. I mean, in Guantanamo, I get contact visits with my clients. I can sit there and eat food with them. And, they trust me. I'm not going to spring someone out of prison. I'm there to represent them.
Reports indicate Siddiqui has been attacked by inmates and staff, denied adequate medical care, and subjected to solitary confinement for extended periods.
And her lawyers have filed a lawsuit, again alleging, quote unquote, repeated sexual assaults, medical neglect, and other inhumane treatment. And the isolation of single cell confinement has made her more vulnerable to these abuses, which, understandably would worsen her mental and physical health.
Furthermore, Siddiqui's requests for religious accommodations such as access to an imam have been denied, violating her First Amendment rights. Denying prisoners the ability to practice their faith is a human rights violation under both US and international law. I don't know what they're thinking, Imam bubla ke bhai.
Yeah, why would, what?
Damaga, Allah Akbar.
Yeah, literally. And Siddiqui's case aligns with Nahla Abdo's argument in her paper titled Forgotten History, Lost Voices and Silent Souls, Women Political Detainees, where Abdo discusses how the bodies of female detainees are often weaponized as tools of oppression, with sexual violence used to break down both their identity and resistance. Abdo writes, "It is argued that in political detention, women's bodies are transformed into sexualized and racialized objects, stripped by the colonial state in general and the prison authorities more specifically of any and all human meaning, and thus these bodies are turned into a tool of oppression."
Scary. So let's get into the systematic issues at FMC Carswell. Its history of mismanagement extends beyond Siddiqui's case. Between 2014 and 2018, 35 women reported sexual assaults by staff, more than any other federal women's prison. These are only the reported cases. Fear of retaliation means the real numbers are likely higher.
Right. And Julie Abate from Just Detention International, a human rights organization, points out that solitary confinement exacerbates inmates' vulnerability. Siddiqui's confinement fits into a broader pattern of systemic neglect and abuse that permeates U.S. correctional facilities. And while this may be happening on U.S. soil, it is an eerie reminder of the inhumane violence that occurred in Abu Ghraib, violence that was gendered and socio-religious, with the intent to dehumanize and feminize Muslim men captives. And in case you weren't aware what Abu Ghraib was, it was a prison complex in Abu Ghraib, Iraq, which was located west of Baghdad. And it was opened in the 1950s and served as a maximum security prison. And from the 1970s onwards, the prison was utilized by Saddam Hussein to hold political prisoners, and later the US used it to hold Iraqi prisoners. And it finally closed in 2014, and it's essentially a lot of horrific tortures and extrajudicial killings had occurred there. Well, however, back to Aafia, since she is both Muslim and a woman, she is further othered while simultaneously being more feared, because Muslim women are not expected to engage in acts of political violence and terrorism like their male counterparts. This shines a light on the binary and biased view American and much of Western ideology has on Islam and Muslims. And just to kind of add in something, just to circle back to Abu Ghraib for a moment, one of the examples of torture that was used against the Muslim men in that prison, to give a better example of how American ideology or American military ideology is like so deeply Islamophobic, is that they would essentially like destroy the Quran in front of the male prisoners, the Iraqi male prisoners. There, from what I've read, they would defecate on the Quran, or I think urinate on the Quran, and they would have a female soldier, I think, also urinate on the male prisoners. And there was something related to pigs, which, as we know, are haram, and something about force feeding them pig meat. So I think that just goes to show how specific the torture was in relation to their religion, in relation to Islam.
These binaries created by American and Islamophobic ideology makes Aafia more vulnerable to violence. While the US has adopted the Prison Rape Elimination Act to prevent such abuses, enforcement at Carswell has been weak. Siddiqui's case exemplifies the failure of these protections, particularly for Muslim women who often face additional layers of discrimination.
So now let's discuss the impact on Pakistani politics, as well as, I guess, the overall international relations. So Siddiqui's imprisonment remains a political flashpoint in Pakistan. As mentioned, Yusuf Raza Gilani, former president,
Daughter of the nation.
had referred to her as a daughter of the nation. And protests demanding her release are common, and she has become a symbol of national pride and injustice. Pakistani leaders have made numerous attempts to negotiate her repatriation, and one of them is actually going forth as we speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. They probably have sent a team to US to negotiate while I think Biden is still in power, and they're probably going to try to push him to get her released. And I think that's what Clive was also saying, Clive Stafford Smith.
Yeah, and
you can develop this pressure on Biden because first of all, just being a father, I think. Okay. And then he's like that he wants to do something before he leaves, so he wants to leave a good legacy amongst the Muslims.
Clive Stafford Smith?
Yeah, that he said regarding Joe Biden.
Oh, Joe Biden wants to leave a legacy amongst the Muslims?
Yeah. Also.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, what I was reading in a Dawn article is that they're sending like a full legal team and like medical legal team to go visit her and see what's up and how she's doing and to make a case to get her out. However, the U.S. has been reluctant to engage for years, likely due to the broader implications of revisiting her case, which would point to, a very large possibility of just like deceit, I guess, lying to make her, because they felt that she was a quote unquote easy target or something. And in 2022, actually, an incident brought renewed attention to Siddiqui's situation, as, it's currently being renewed right now, I would say. And I would say that has a lot to do with her lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith, wouldn't you say, with his appearance on Al Jazeera, the Al Jazeera show?
So that gave the case a little more attention, is that what you're saying?
For the attention that it's receiving right now, yeah, I do believe so. And I think that another point in history where it received a lot of attention was in 2022, where Malik Faisal Akram, who was a British national of Pakistani descent, British Pakistani, took hostages at a Texas synagogue, demanding her release. And, funnily enough, Siddiqui, distanced herself from the attack through her lawyers and, made it very clear that she had no connection to the incident.
No, that's not the kind of attention she was looking for.
Exactly.
But the standoff ended with Akram's death as he was shot multiple times by the FBI hostage rescue team.
Oh dear.
The hostages remained largely unharmed and did not require medical attention. The incident intensified debates about religious extremism, mental health, and the global impact of controversial convictions like Siddiqui's. It also complicated diplomatic efforts, as both Pakistan and the US condemned the attack while reaffirming their position on Siddiqui's incarceration.
And yeah, I mean, really that brings up questions, but Siddiqui's case itself raises broader questions about how Muslims, particularly Muslim women, are treated in the criminal justice system, but also how they're viewed by, the American imperialist gaze. Hannah?
Right, the gaze.
The gaze. But the American gaze, the imperial gaze.
Right.
And it's this intersection of Islamophobia, misogyny, and systemic abuse that is starkly evident in her story. It's like one of the darkest intersections, of Islamophobia, misogyny, and this kind of, carceral violence जो सिर्फ prisons में होती है, like we were saying, her lawyer Clive Stafford Smith had also openly spoken of how the US officials who detained her likely killed the youngest of her 3 children by dropping him on the head. Whether this was intentional or an accident, I'm not really sure, but it is suggested by Clive Stafford Smith that her youngest child, who was maybe 3 years old at the time, if I'm remembering correctly, was dropped on the head by the US officials who detained her, and her other 2 children were separated from her and put in different homes until they were 18, according to Clive. And yeah, I just can't even imagine, like having to experience that.
Yeah, to see your child die in front of you like that.
I don't know if it was in front of her, so I just want to clarify. I don't know अगर वो उसके सामने हुआ.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know अगर वो Clive Stafford Smith ने
It's
क्या
just probably
कहा
just
उसके
for
बारे
the
में.
sympathy, maybe.
Yeah, just kind of sympathy, क्या?
Oh, okay. No, I don't know
Mm.
what Clive says. I
I
don't
think-
remember what he said.
Oh, okay, no. Well, yeah, like I think she was detained and then they took her children, right? They separated her from her children, and it is said by her lawyer that the US officials who took her children, 2 of her children, her first and second child, were separated from her and separated from each other, put in alag-alag homes.
Oh, okay.
But जो तीसरा बच्चा था, सबसे छोटा, I think they dropped him or something, dropped him on the head. Whether it was जानबूझ के or not, nobody knows. But yeah, essentially, वो फौत हो गया.
Interesting. Oh, well, not interesting. Sad. That's sad, everybody. That's sad.
It's horrific. It's tragic.
It's tragic. Post 9/11, many Muslims have been prosecuted under dubious charges, often facing harsher sentences than others for similar offenses. These cases reflect a legal system that, in times of political tension, prioritizes national security over justice and fairness.
And the treatment Siddiqui has endured also highlights the vulnerability of women in prison. As the previous excerpt that I read by Nahla Ab reflected, and Abdo's work on female detainees also emphasizes how state institutions strip women of their identity turning them into tools of control and domination. And
Siddiqui's case embodies these themes, making it a focal point for activists advocating for prison reform and challenging the biases that underpin the criminal justice system.
so, what lies ahead for Aafia Siddiqui? Her legal team is calling for a third-party investigation into the abuses at FMC Carswell. And there are efforts to have the prison shut down entirely. And, as we know, Pakistan seems to be taking action on this, seems to be sending a medical legal team, a team of people to meet with her and to, I guess, evaluate her condition and push for her release.
Right. And this public pressure would play a decisive role. The support Siddiqui receives in both the US and Pakistan could force meaningful change. Whether or not she is guilty, the violations of her human rights demand accountability.
Right. And in addition to the medical legal team that is being sent over, prior to that, in a recent letter to US President Joe Biden, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif appealed for Siddiqui's release on humanitarian grounds, citing concerns about her mental and physical health. And it was after this letter that they are now sending this team, which is amazing, honestly. Like, I think this should have been done a long time ago, but, she's serving an 86-year sentence
Right, yeah.
for a crime that doesn't even have any evidence.
Yeah, it's not been proven yet. I mean, well, that's true. I mean, that's what we're saying, right? They're asking for the whole, like, FMC Carswell to close down because probably they have other people like that.
Yeah, systemic, like 35, right? At least 35 reported, cases of abuse and assault. And as I was speaking on this academic, Nahla Abdo, who wrote that paper on Palestinian women as political detainees, what she said in that paper is that often, it is very much a norm for women political detainees and prisoners to experience abuse and assault
Yeah.
in these kinds of prisons, and especially in solitary confinement, right? Usme to, you're alone, or koi aur nahi hai, koi witnesses nahi hoti hain, like, nobody actually knows what's happening to you, right? And you're all alone, and solitary confinement mein, your living conditions are horrible on top of that. And uske upar just, being a Muslim woman, like in this American, prison in Texas, like, I just cannot imagine the kind of violence that she has probably faced. The kind of biases, the kind of, just, it's terrifying, honestly. It's just terrifying to think about it.
And it's good that, Shahbaz Sharif, with his whatever he was made, Shahbaz speak could have made gotten in before, but certainly now in his letter he emphasized his duty to ensure the well-being of Pakistani citizens and called on Biden to act with the same compassion that the US shows towards its citizens held abroad. Whether this appeal will sway US policymakers remains uncertain, of course. Like Biden, it's election season, so nobody cares. Biden only cares about, I guess, about the big game, Israel, I don't know. But let's see.
Israel is fake. Well, at the heart of Aafia Siddiqui's story lies a profound sense of injustice, of course, one that extends beyond borders and speaks to the flaws of international law, political maneuvering, and human rights violations. For many, she is not just a prisoner or a detainee. She is a symbol of institutional failure, systemic racist and misogynistic violence, Islamophobic violence, and the cost of unchecked power. Like this US imperialist machine has just been out of control for far too long. I'm saying it.
Yeah, and her case challenges the justice system to address systemic inequalities. It raises uncomfortable but necessary questions about how marginalized communities, especially Muslim women, are treated within powerful institutions, and especially in the West. Siddiqui's suffering is not just her own, it reflects the collective struggle of many discrimination and abuse in prisons globally.
The Aafia Siddiqui case urges governments, activists, and legal experts, amongst others in positions of power, to reconsider how justice is administered. You know, this whole system of justice, I mean, it's so intertwined with the carceral system, with the prison system, with, you know, it's just like carceral capitalism. You know, it's this idea of where, you know, like a certain class is imprisoned. You know, in the US, it's like jo log jo prison mein zyadatar jaate hain, jo repeat offenses ke liye jaate hain, it's like, you know, people who are like selling weed or something, right?
Right.
और फिर वो इसमें फंस जाते हैं because once you're in prison, you get stuck. You have a criminal record for selling weed. Imagine, you're selling
Right.
weed, you're selling marijuana, you go to jail, you get out, you have a criminal record, you can't get a decent job. You know, on top of that, you may not have, you know, a high school education or university education, right? Let alone high school education. फिर तुम prison में जाते हो, फिर, you know, you get out and you're like,
You're
okay,
probably
I
trying to
need to
make money.
survive. Yeah, I need to survive, so let me sell weed again. And then let's say you go to jail again for that. And then on top of that, now you have a, you know, more criminal record. And with Cooper, you're stuck also in a debt cycle then, right? Because it's like, you need income, you know, you have done this thing that took you to jail that is, you know, in nature completely harmless, right? And ludicrous that it's even a, you know, a criminal offense still in lots of places in the world.
Right.
And then you get stuck in this debt cycle because what can you do other than take loans, right? Like those kinds of like payday loans or whatever, you know, with extremely high interest, and then you get stuck in that loop. And it's just this loop of debt and, you know, having a criminal record, and it just goes on and on. And, you know, excuse me, the political nature of Afia's conviction, the questionable trial process, and the reports of her mistreatment illustrate the need for comprehensive reform. From prison conditions to the handling of cases involving national security, the system requires transparency and fairness. It's just more reason to rally for prison abolishment. I mean, that's a very anarchist take, I know, but you know, I don't appreciate the prison system. I'm just inserting my personal opinion here.
Right, okay.
I'm not a fan of prisons. I'm not a fan of capital punishment at all, let alone prisons. But just this idea of, you know, reform. You know, someone like, it's just that thought, right? Like, देखो पाकिस्तान में कितने लोग blasphemy law, you know, unfairly.
Use करते हैं.
क्या?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, what are you saying?
Use
Sam?
करते हैं and fairly use करते हैं.
No, but yeah, but like how many people have probably gone to prison, you know, based on the blasphemy law. I mean, the fact that the blasphemy law is even a criminal offense, man. Like, you know, you can't even freely express your opinions or views, religious views, and, you know, but it is also abused, right? It's definitely an abused law, and the amount of innocent people jo jail mein baithe hain, you know, because of this arbitrary draconian law that is so stupid. It's just such a ridiculous law. And, you know, blasphemy law की वजह से बहुत लोग वो death penalty, you know, भी मिल जाती है उनको. Like, you know,
Yeah.
they're like on death row for, it's just, it makes no sense to me. So, from Afia's prison conditions to the handling of cases involving national security, the system requires transparency and fairness. It's just more reason to rally for prison abolishment, as I said. Or at the very least, total and complete reform of how they're run, right? If you can't, let's be real, prisons probably won't be abolished, but at least if, they can be radically transformed.
Transformed, yeah. So advocates emphasize that it's not just about releasing Siddiqui, it's about ensuring accountability for the harm done and preventing further abuses. True justice requires that you look beyond her case as an isolated event and address the deeper issues it reveals.
For Pakistan, Siddiqui remains a rallying point, an emblem of state pride and defiance against perceived Western double standards. But her fate also reflects the limitations of diplomatic power. Until both nations engage in meaningful dialogue and, stop being such a daddy relationship, the deadlock around her release may continue.
Right. Ultimately, this case highlights the power of collective pressure, public advocacy, international awareness, and media attention have already kept Siddiqui's story alive for over a decade. The road to justice may be long, but voices demanding fairness for Siddiqui and others like her cannot be ignored forever.
Except unless you're, that Malik Akram, then Praki, the FBI is gonna fucking shoot you.
Who's Malik? Okay.
Rojo, synagogue page of Yata.
Right.
Because that's what they do, right? Any fucking black and brown people, anybody starting the marcha, it's just like, we're just gonna fucking shoot you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all they do.
Yeah, that's true. Reform is a long and challenging process.
Clearly.
But cases like Siddiqui's expose the cracks in the system. If we are to build fairer institutions, rather than dismantling them entirely, we need to address these threats with courage and persistence, demanding accountability at every level.
Since we can't dismantle them entirely, I suppose this is
you gotta chip one by one, right? You cannot dismantle everything, but you gotta keep chipping away like a chip, like a woodcutter.
Like a chip.
Like a chip.
Well, as we wrap up today's episode, we encourage our listeners to reflect on the larger themes that Siddiqui's story touches. Whether it's the need for more humane treatment of prisoners or to, ideally, abolish the prison system entirely. The fight against Islamophobia and Western neo-imperialism and neo-Orientalism are the call for justice reform. I believe we need to reimagine what justice can look like.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Aafia Siddiqui's case. Stay informed, stay critical, and remember, justice is not the final destination, but an ongoing process.
Why is it so difficult to get justice in America?
We love to hate people, and the Ku Klux Klan did it with black people. We do it with Muslims and people we call criminals. And it's a very sad element of human nature, and then we set up rules that make it very difficult for someone in prison to get justice. We lost our way post 9/11. I hope to goodness we're going to find it again.